Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Camila Dos Santos, and I am the HRI Program Coordinator. And I'm so excited to have you with us today, whether you're joining us live for our premiere of this video, or whether you're tuning in later for a later viewing. I'm excited to introduce both Stormy and Tim Covington, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about their experiences as a married couple and also share a little bit about their professional sort of experiences and kind of tie in why they're here today and why they agreed to talk with me about this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys take it away.
Yes, so like she said, we are the Covington. I'm Tim, it's my beautiful wife, Stormy. We have been married for 4 years.
Yes.
In September 3rd.
Mhm. Yes, and so we are delighted to be here today. Young marriage is so important to us. We're young and we're married, and we understand the struggles that we're walking through as we are navigating, weaving our lives with this other individual. And so a little bit of background about us is, like my husband said, we've been married for 4 years. We actually met in middle school, and we are high school homecoming king and queen. And then we were just best friends in college. And then somehow we decided that we were in love with each other and we should get married. so um, my husband is a counselor. He works at A&T. He helps students with disabilities get their accommodations. And so I am in the nonprofit field. And so, I say that to say that our hearts are for people, and we really are passionate about helping others. And at our church, we serve as the Millennial Marriage Leaders, and we really just have an opportunity to connect with other couples and really just remind them that we're not in this alone and that we have community, and community is important.
I appreciate you sort of sharing a little bit about your personal and professional kind of backgrounds and also your story and how you met. For our HRI audience out there, just to give you some background, when Stormy and I first met, we were meeting for a separate work meeting and got all caught up in having this discussion about her Millennial Marriages group and her story of how she met her husband, and just sort of seeing a friendship kind of evolve into a partner relationship and eventually into a marriage that's been strong, happy, and healthy for 4 years. And so I'm just so excited to sort of get your insights, to share that with our HRI audience, especially for those who might be either in, early in their marriages or in committed relationships, or maybe talking about engagement and kind of moving down that path to marriage. So let's just kind of go ahead and dive right in. We know that today's couples, they face a lot of different obstacles, and maybe some of those obstacles have been around for, a long time, but there's also some new things that today's sort of younger married couples have to face that maybe couples who were married 20, 30 years ago didn't necessarily have to deal with right away. So maybe to start, can we just kind of talk about what some of those obstacles might be?
Yes. So, the first one I'd say is social media. It
Yes.
did not exist then. And so, or it was coming around to be, right? Like when our parents were probably young in their marriages. But I'd say that social media is one of those things where it's really good. It can be great for professional network, but it can really be detrimental to marriages and young relationships when we don't put healthy boundaries around it. And so, as we are learning to operate in this new space with a spouse, but we're also bringing in that social media world into our homes. Our parents could go out into the world, but they could leave it there, and then they could come back together. But now we're inviting this social media space into our homes, and it operates so much of our lives and takes up so much of our time that we don't realize how we create and allow for different obstacles and barriers to present themselves, when we could really take a handle on it and say, no, I'm going to put boundaries around this so that I don't allow this to be an issue in my marriage.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And one of the things for social media is that we see things that people doing for their spouse. And so it causes us to say, okay, why my marriage can't do that? Why my wife can't do that? Or my husband can't do that? And so now we have the expectation that our partner must do because we see the results of others. And so for Stormy and I, we had to put boundary on social media to say, hey, let's limit our time 30 minutes a day, and also let's have conversation about our marriage, what we can do to help support others. So.
Yeah, so many great points there. I think by far the biggest difference in today's relationships is just this whole idea of social media and how sometimes it unintentionally impacts our lives and our relationships. I heard you say or just allude to the fact that we don't always know that that social media is actually even influencing our relationships, right? Because it kind of seeps into our perspectives and our expectations. And maybe you scroll and you see something that somebody else did for someone, and it maybe makes you feel some type of way, and you kind of sit with that, and before you know it, you have this miscommunication or this problem that you might not have had before. And I've heard you both sort of talk about boundaries. Can you expand on what maybe one or two boundaries that couples can discuss in regards to social media, or even maybe some things that have worked for the both of you?
Yeah, so one thing we can only share from experience. So we have followed this couple on our social media, and we have goals and the calls over our life from God and things that we want to do. And so we saw ourselves, starting to get like, well, you can say jealous in a way, because it was like, wow, like they're doing this. So my wife had to step up for us and say, hey, I'm going to unfollow this individual, not because I dislike them, but because it's reminding me what I'm not doing and what I should be doing. And so when we removed ourselves from that page, we can see the growth, and it's multiple pages, but we can see the growth in us to say what works for the Covington. Mm-hmm. So that opened up that communication there.
Yeah, and a really big thing around that is, we unintentionally begin to idolize things and we don't realize that we're idolizing those things. And so when we put up that healthy boundary to say, maybe I need to unfollow accounts, maybe your spouse is asking you to unfollow, a particular account that doesn't sit well with her or doesn't sit well with him, having that respect and that boundary to say, I want to honor what my spouse has asked of me. Or I would say another boundary is about time limiting. So if there was something early on in our marriage that after 9 or 10 o'clock, we want to shut off from the phone. We want to, sometimes it's hard. We know friends are going to call and different things, but we wanted to put that boundary in place because, after work, you want to sit around and you want to hang out and you're just scrolling and scrolling, and now it's midnight and then it's time to go to bed and it's time to wake up for work, and that becomes a cycle. So if you put that boundary around time and those restrictions, then it will really bring life to your marriage, because it'll give an opportunity for you to have that time together rather than spending that time with other people.
Yeah, I'm hearing you both kind of two major strategies are emerging from what you shared. And I think the first thing is just really being intentional about what you're viewing, and also kind of acknowledging that, an account or, a particular person that you may follow could be very positive, could have, wonderful sort of ideas and things to motivate us in our marriage, but they might not serve us in that moment. And so just kind of being aware of that, because I think we see a lot of, curate your social media feed, make sure you're following all these right accounts. And it could be the most positive account in the world, but it might not just be what you need for your marriage at that time. It could insert some additional negative things, even though it might be a positive spin on how to approach certain aspects of marriage. So I love that piece, because I don't think we think enough about that. I think when we think about curating our social media feed, we want to take out the negative, right? Take out some of the things that are super obvious, but it's not always very obvious. And then hearing you talk about time is important too. I think we don't have enough of it, despite the fact that many of us are still at home. It still feels like we don't have enough time. And so really taking the time to be intentional and sit with one another, and not let hours kind of just slide away because you're scrolling on your phone. And I just have one more to sort of add, that as you were sharing it, it occurred to me that maybe another thing for couples to think about in terms of social media boundaries would be oversharing or undersharing, and talking to each other about what your expectations are there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that is one that we have talked about often in our marriage. And so, you really just want to we talk a lot about systems, and you'll probably hear us talk a lot about systems a little bit more in the conversation, but you really want to have a system where if you get an inkling that you want to share something, is this something that I need to run by my spouse? Do they feel comfortable with this being public? A lot of times we'll be in conversations, even if we're chatting with someone like we are now, and my husband will look over at me and he'll say, do you mind if I share? that's an opportunity for me to say no, and then we can segue to something else. And so you really want to be mindful of how much you share, and then even in undersharing, being mindful of that as well. There's some people who are influencers, and so you are on that balance of what do I share and what do I not share, but just being mindful that you're respecting what your spouse is asked when you put those systems in place.
I want to add to that, help it bring into perspective is that, you know how on social media we share something and say, hey, guys, try out this product. And then the next day you don't hear nothing about that product. So I think that's how people are viewing marriage, that they want to present that they are married, and then the next day they don't want to work at it. So when we need to understand the power of what marriage means, and then that will help us to say, hey, should I share this information? Because does this go in line with my marriage? Does it help my marriage? Does it disrupt my marriage? And I think it goes back to understanding what marriage means. And I think for young people, we need to understand the true meaning of marriage so that we can follow through what marriage is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And we are definitely going to get into sort of that meaning of marriage in our next segment. And I'm so excited to hear about, what the both of you have to say about that. But I really kind of appreciate this conversation of over and under sharing. And, I think it's important to not make any assumptions either. Because I think, so much can come from just if I think something is an overshare or an undershare, how that can impact just how I communicate with my spouse that day, or how we communicate with each other. But then to sort of add to that, I read an article a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so, about just this idea that a lot of times couples will express gratitude or express a compliment on social media and forget to actually express that directly to their spouse. And that
Yeah.
can become sort of this trap we get into too. Your spouse does something wonderful for you, and maybe you post it on social media before you actually intentionally thank them, right? So just like being very aware of just what you're sharing, and maybe connecting with each other first, whether it is to clear up, can I share this? But then also to make sure that you're extending that moment individually to your spouse first before you share it with the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so, we've talked a lot about social media, and I think that's important because that's what one of the major obstacles that couples, young couples are facing today. But, we also know that young couples face sort of geographic difficulties, whether that means that they themselves live apart. It's not uncommon, especially in today's sort of remote world, to even have spouses living apart for a certain amount of time, or to be away from family and friends and support systems. And so how do young couples really build that support system, and how can they seek that out in a healthy way, especially if, they're, for example, living in a city where they know no one?
Yeah. So for us, when we speak from experience, we speak from um, our own personal what we did, and so that was really seeking out a church for us. So we are faith believers. We are believers that we can find community in the faith, and so you know early on in our relationship, we actually did live apart. So I was living in Durham and I was getting my graduate degree, and he was living here in Greensboro. And so I could see that there was a difference when one of us had community and the other didn't have community. And so, you know, that can really take a toll on your relationship. And so not only do you have to find community for yourself in terms of, how do I connect and where do I connect in, but you have to find that mutual community and whatever that looks like. And so we're in a virtual space. So if that's connecting in, we've done things and seen married couples log on separately. They're in two different houses, but somehow they've logged on to Zoom separately, right? But they've connected in and plugged in somewhere. And so when you find that community, it could be in someone that's just like-minded, another guy or another woman, another husband or another wife who can speak to the situation in terms of encouraging you through that season. But I would really say that community is so important, and for us, having that faith-based community was big for us.
Yes. Even you guys watching this is part of your community, because you always got to remind yourself why you're in it. What are you in it for, and why you're in it? And so just connecting to different podcasts, or like I said, social media, or this type of recording as well. Um, yeah, just connecting to the community. You just need to be reminded. That's the thing, because we can be in it for so long and feel alone because we're separate. Um, that's why we need that constant reminder to say it's love out there. It's a way to show your love when you're distant. It's a way to do things
because you don't want to get into the system and the habit of just I, right? Like we've operated like that before we got married, and then we've got to make that transition to we. So when we are young and we're starting out married and we're not together physically just yet, and we're operating against this barrier of distance, we're still operating in that I because we haven't made that we just yet. And so you've got to consciously do things to get yourself out of the I element and into the we element in whatever capacity that looks like for you.
So I want to add one more thing.
Yeah.
So people that are married and separated, not separated, but separate area location.
Yeah.
There's like so many different apps that you guys can use. There was an app that we had. I can find it for you, but there's an app where you can put your fingerprint on it, and then she can put her fingerprint and feel the vibration of the fingerprint together. So there's so many different ways that you guys can stay connected without physically being together.
Yeah, so many great points. I mean, I'm hearing the biggest message here is intentionality, staying aware, staying intentional, seeking out ways to get better, right? To strengthen yourself as a person, but also together. But then I'm also hearing you both sort of talk about the importance of community, the importance of a support system. And for you both, it was, finding a church and kind of having that sort of spiritual guidance and that like-minded community. But for other couples, it can really just be anything that they enjoy doing together. So it could be, going to the gym together, attending yoga classes, doing mindfulness courses, or a little bit of everything, right? And so I think it's important to just do that piece together, like you mentioned. But then, Stormy, you also touched on the importance of just having your own individual community as well. And that touches on the importance of self-care and taking care of ourselves and making sure that, we are whole and we're whole on our own, but then we're also a part of a greater whole as well. So I really appreciate you sharing those aspects, because I think for young couples moving to new cities and just, embarking on new journeys together, it's really important to find a way to connect with each other where you live and to find other people that you can look to for mentorship or conversation, or even if it's just to say there's somebody else that could be struggling with this. And I think that's really important, and I appreciate you sharing all of those points. And so let's kind of dive right into these early stages of marriage. And this was not on the script, but Tim, you mentioned it earlier, and I have to revisit this because I think it's important for this section. Talk to us about what the meaning of marriage is. I think that young couples sometimes forget or have different ideas, and so it's really important to have these open conversations. And so, for the both of you, what does marriage mean?
So for me, I'm gonna make it simple. It's covenant and not contract. I think we operate marriage out of a contract that you must do this and this is how you should do it, and then I will be involved. But covenant is saying I am a husband and I must still continue to serve my wife regardless of what's happening, what condition. It's an unconditional love that I must present, that I must work with. And so marriage is where it's just covenant. It's a connection. We have this three strand where it's God, husband, and wife, and we tie it together, and no one can untie it. So I'm a visual person. So marriage for me, I have to have a visual of what it looks like to remind me daily. When I'm upset, I still must serve my wife. I still must continue to push as a husband and not operate out of feelings.
Yes, and I echo all of those things, and also add that when you look at marriage in this, you have to see it through the lens of a partnership, and that I am not, we are a team, and I am not going to fail my team. I am not going to fail my partner. And so when I'm committed to this, I can't be committed to it based upon what you do. I have to be committed to it based upon what I bring to the team. And if we both are thinking or looking at marriage through that lens of this is a partner and I am here for my team to win, then that means that we begin to fight together. That means that we begin to see marriage as this unit that we can matriculate through life. We can move through life as a partnership and really walk out this covenant and take our eyes off of the physical paper of a contract, which people would want us to believe.
Yeah, I think what you said is so powerful because it can just be applied in so many ways. So, what I'm hearing you really say is that marriage is not about doing things for your spouse because you have to, right? Or because you signed this contract that one day, however long ago, that said you will do that, right? It's more about doing it because you want to. You want to serve your spouse and you want to and when we say serve, we really just mean be a partner, provide support, be there and love one another. And you want to do that regardless of where they might be that day, right? And I think that's ultimately what that long-term commitment and marriage really is, you know, loving that person on their not so great days and on their great days, and keeping in mind that on the days where they're not their best are probably the days where we need to show up more for them.
Absolutely. And if we look at it through the lens of saying, I get to do this because one day we wanted to be married, right? It was one day before all of the arguing and all the other things where we were like really excited about getting married. And so if we look through the lens and say, I have gratitude about this, I get to do this, that changes our mentality about how we see marriage because I get to do this and not I have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of speaks to the earlier program we recorded today. So this is a series of two videos, and earlier today, our speakers were talking about how conflict is actually a blessing because it's an opportunity to connect more intimately with someone, and how many people don't have that opportunity, right? To know someone so well that there's potential for new conflict every day, right? Because you're just kind of growing and learning together. So absolutely, when you sort of look at it from a um, less of a I have to and more of a I get to, it really can change the perspective. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be problems, but the way you approach those problems become more healthy for sure.
Right, right.
And I actually want to go back to that first question when you asked what is the issue that the young couples have or young marriage have, is handling those conflicts. When we become uncomfortable, we want a quick fix or we want to run away. And so that's why you see increase of divorces out here, because it's unmet expectation. If I'm feeling uncomfortable or he or she doesn't love me, but having those conversations about the conflict and allowed you to expose or to discover what you love or what you should do to help speak your love language and things like that. So I think for couples, we have to understand how to navigate through conflict and being uncomfortable, because that very thing, it can be what further your relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in terms of navigating through conflict, an important piece to remember too is that there are conflicts that we can't solve, right? There's that old saying, agree to disagree. And there's a reason why we still use that saying after all these years, which is sometimes we just have to agree that we will not agree with the people that we love the most. And I think when you accept that, it's a lot easier to navigate that conflict and just understand that we might never get to a resolution on this, but let's keep talking about it. Let's keep understanding why we're coming from this perspective.
Yes.
And on that note, the longer you're married, it seems the more there is to disagree on, right? And so how can, young couples know the difference between maybe something that's considered normal conflict and maybe something that might be a sign of a bigger problem?
Yes. So the first thing that I would say is patterns. So patterns and triggers. So, a lot of times we don't acknowledge that, or not even acknowledge, we don't really realize or, acknowledge that our partners have trauma and they have triggers that they have growing up that stem from childhood. And so when we don't acknowledge those things and say that, perhaps this is a trigger for them, I'm seeing this pattern that they are often offended or they are often affected by when I say this or when this happens. If I don't acknowledge that that's a pattern and I just continue to blow over it and blow past it and allow that to be something that blows up, then yes, I'm never going to determine the difference between what's a normal, conflict or what's something that may need bigger attention. And so when I acknowledge that, okay, this has become a trigger for them or is a trigger for them, and it may stem from past trauma or something that we need to discuss, then I can say, oh, this is something that's bigger that maybe we need to, have counseling about, which we are proponents of. You need counseling when you're healthy. But
Yeah.
but that may be, or but it may be other things where It may be smaller, where it was just a miscommunication. So it was something about who was dropping the kids off. Maybe we need to, up our communication. Maybe we need to find ways to communicate more, maybe over communicate. Rather, this is something was a one-off situation, so it happened this particular time or what have you, versus something that I'm seeing a pattern in, and I know that needs more attention.
Yeah. And so just this whole idea of respecting and knowing your partner's triggers, understanding how sometimes the past influences how we view things now. And just to even expand on that, using that knowledge to treat conflict differently the next time, right? So if you learn something about your partner or a trigger or something about the way that you say something, if that's going to trigger a negative reaction in them or this emotional reaction, then tending to not doing that next time, right? Or trying to be more sensitive to that next time is one way to just make sure that you're handling conflict in a healthy way. But also, I would say, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, not tending to those or not being aware or intentional about learning that about your partner could be an unhealthy way to just navigate conflict in general, because it's sort of like you're ignoring the signs that your partner is showing you.
I was going to say that sometimes the person that has the issue may not see it because you're not the person outside looking in. But when your spouse present that issue or present what they see, at first I was like, that is not my problem. I do not deal with that. So let's next conversation. But I begin to see the cycle. And so the cycle allows for her to communicate to me, hey, do you see what I'm talking about? And sometimes it took a cycle for me to see it. And that's when I knew it was a bigger issue that needs to be addressed, even though I didn't agree at the beginning or I couldn't see it at the beginning. So sometimes you may not see it, but allow your spouse to speak on it, because she's the woman that sees things differently from a man. So we must respect a woman's perspective as a man.
Yeah, and so
Vice
when
versa.
those, yeah, and vice versa, right? And so when those things that are, maybe seen, but you don't want to talk about it because it's hard, when you come to that fork in the road, you have to really say to yourself, is this a selfish act that I don't want to, endure what could be on the other side of this conversation with the conflict? Or am I going to be, I don't know the best term for this, but am I going to be bigger than this situation and say, I want to really fight for my marriage? And so if I want the best out of my marriage, then I'm not going to allow these unspoken things to start eating at my garden. I'm going to allow myself to take a step back and say, how can I approach my spouse in a way that makes them feel heard so that I can share these things so that we can move forward in our marriage?
And to make it practical, to give you something that will help you, we had to write an email. Like we do email. So when it's a hard conversation, yeah. I would send it. Well, no, let me go back. She would send an email to me, and it allows me to sit down and actually read it and say, okay, this is her feeling. This is how she feel about the thing that I'm doing, and they allow me to respond back or to come into the conversation with. So just try emailing or not necessarily texting, because yeah,
but whatever that mode is for you, when we talked about systems and we talked about boundaries, whatever that it works for your marriage, however you decide that you want to communicate. Where I'm a writer, he's a visual person, so he may draw it out, right? So you have to figure out, what is that thing for us that helps us communicate better and have hard conversations.
Yeah, I mean, you've said so many important things, but what I'm really hearing the both of you say is just this idea of communicating through it all, right? Leaning into those difficult conversations, not avoiding those, moments that could seem minor, but that if we continuously ignore can add up to big feelings of resentment and feeling unheard and feeling isolated or even unloved in your relationship. And so just really communicating throughout it all, and making sure that you're communicating in ways that the other person understands. So I love that you mentioned sort of how Stormy will email, and that gives Tim some time to kind of process her feelings. And that's something that even in my marriage, we've had to work through as well. And I'm a big writer, but I also talk a lot, being from New Jersey, and I talk fast. And so early on in my marriage, my husband had to sort of say, it seems like you come to these conversations with like all of your points ready to go, and I need more time. He's like, I need more time to process those things. So now we sort of schedule those conversations as much as, makes sense, to just give both people time to think about what's important to them, think about what they want to accomplish in that conversation, but then also keeping in mind we need to leave room for listening too. But I just kind of appreciated this idea that not every conversation has to be this face-to-face sitting at the table. Sometimes it's best served in different ways.
Yes. I'd say this one last thing that we've talked about recently is, we always talk about making safe spaces in friendships and relationships and partnerships. And so those safe spaces are an opportunity for people to listen. But we also want to create brave spaces in our marriages where people feel that they have the confidence to be able to speak and share their own hearts. Because a lot of times we as women, like you said, we're ready to talk. And if I don't create a brave space where my husband feels confident that he's bringing something to me that I'm going to actually take in and make him feel confident to share and not beat him down, then I'm only going to be a place where he, sits and he takes in from me, but he doesn't feel that exchange. And so I want to be intentional about creating a brave space where he actually feels empowered to share with me.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. And I think there are skills that you can practice in those moments too that are really important to make sure you're not flooding your partner or overwhelming your partner. And, one example, one thing that I have to do often is I have to remember to be quiet. And so I have my things that I do, to remind myself. And it's little things, physical things, maybe how I'll touch my hand to remind myself, or I'll sit on my hands until it's time for me to talk. And they seem silly, but it reminds me that it's a two-way conversation, and it allows my husband to take a more active role versus me kind of just doing the counselor talk, until he's sick of hearing me. And it's hard because our partners know us the best, and it's hard to have somebody that you love say things to you about yourself that you might not be ready to brave yet, right? Tim, you kind of alluded to that earlier. And so knowing how to say it in a way that they can receive it, but then also being willing to receive it is equally as important.
Yes.
And so when we talk about, conflict in marriages, and we touched on that a little bit, but what about sort of when couples, maybe they disagree on lifestyle issues? And so, ideally couples have these big conversations before they get married, but even if they do, sometimes things change. Or maybe, you didn't have them as transparently before, and now you find that maybe you disagree. And so we're talking about things like moving out of state, or starting that, risky business plan, or having children, and deciding how to go about having children, and that whole timeline. So when we're talking about these major life decisions, is there a way to navigate these without sort of feeling like they're deal breakers when you disagree?
Okay. I'll start and say that we started reading a book a while back about love and respect, and that men need respect in relationships and that women need love. And so I say that that is the foundation of difficult decisions, especially when you are not seeing eye to eye. And your approach has to be that, we may not agree on this starting this business in a pandemic, or we may not agree on having a baby right now, but I have to respect my husband because this may be an idea that he brought to the table. Or if it's the wife that brought the idea to the table, I need to love on her. I need to show her that I hear you, find, whatever those ways of her love language or whatever that is, you find that way to make her feel loved, that what she's bringing to the table or what her opinion is, that you hear her, and that on the other side of it, that your husband feels respected. I think if we can mutually agree to those two things, that you can navigate any difficult decision together.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
That
One
was
of
the
the
perfect
things,
answer, wasn't it, Tim?
yeah, perfect. But no, for real. So for us, this works for us is that each year we start off with what are the goals that we're going to set in place for each quarter. Now, when you set those goals for each quarter, when things arises a decision, you can always go back to, hey, what were the goals that we have for this quarter? That'll help alleviate those thoughts of like, man, she don't agree with me or he don't agree with me. No, we both talked about these goals at the beginning of the year, and we just want to make sure that it further the goal or it take us away from the goal. But when those decision is made, one thing I learned for our marriage is that constant conversation counts for confusion. If you have continuous conversation, those decisions will have some sort of value or background to it. And what I meant by that is if I want to go to Chicago, I've been talking about going to Chicago for the longest. Not to move there, but she know my intention that I want to go because I want to do more artwork or I want to do more counseling. She knows those things. So it now says, you know what, husband, let's do it because I see the intention behind it. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have a conversation and you say, hey, baby, I want to go to Puerto Rico, what are we going for? So yeah, just having that constant conversation.
Yeah, just having conversation to stay on the same page, but also to understand why your partner wants to do that thing or why they're so fueled by that idea, right? And I loved your practical strategy of just addressing your relationship timeline and goals like you would your business or anything else, right? Setting these quarterly goals and setting times or agreeing to come back and revisit them. That's a really great way to, like you said, just clear up the confusion and and it doesn't mean that those goals won't change or shift, but it gives you sort of a game plan to come back to and revisit and decide, are we moving forward? Do we need to change this aspect a little bit? So I love that, just finding opportunities to do like quarterly assessments of where you are in your marriage and what you want for your future. I would imagine that would clear up a lot of sort of this, when will we have a baby, or when will I start my PhD program, or whatever those big decisions are that you have to make together once you get married. And so in talking about that, let's move on to sort of just preparing for the future. And we know that in the beginning, it's really exciting, right? And you have all these plans and dreams, but it can also be a little bit stressful, especially as you're beginning to actually live in it and navigate it. And so we talked about some of the ways to sort of have these conversations in a way that is intentional about sort of life and life decisions, right? And so how can you sort of prepare for the future and the good stuff that comes in the future, while also kind of preparing as a couple for the tragedy that life sometimes brings, right? Or the stressors that are out of our control. How can couples kind of prepare for those inevitable tough times while still remaining positive?
Yes, that's a great question.
I kind of spinned it a little bit differently on you than our original script, and that's because that's where you took me in this conversation.
I love it, man. I love it.
So we'll talk about it together too.
For me, see so let's go back. So what I love about us is that we're not going based off what other people say.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage other people is find what works for you. And so for us, I like to keep things spicy, fun, and spontaneous. So that allows us to be able to not necessarily easily navigate through the hard thing, but because I know that she feels wanted and loved, that anything dealing with infertility or PCOS and endometriosis, those things like that. Sorry, I just threw that out there. No, but just to show how we overcame that, because the setup was I showed that I loved her. And now, as she goes through these things, she doesn't have to mentally worry about, do my husband support me? Even though she may ask, we need to affirm that as always, but that is something you want to do. You want to make sure that your marriage is set up to be able to love through those tragedies or those different things that comes up.
Yeah. That's really good. I think the thing that really just taught me this in our marriage is something that we haven't really talked about yet, and
yeah, I kind of just threw it out there, didn't I?
No, not that. I'm talking about your hearing. So Tim is actually hard of hearing, and so he wears, he's supposed to wear bilateral hearing aids, y'all. So y'all get on him. But he does wear his one hearing aid. But I've known him since middle school, right? And so I've had to love him through a lot of different things, and we've had our own challenges with friends and just personality differences, and we've had to navigate this space where what's the best way to describe it? I'll give you examples. So in 2013, we lost really close family members on the same exact day. This was before we were married. And so we were just friends. And so I really genuinely believe because of his disability, our like relationship literally has been connected. I've always felt like his advocate. So when things happened, I've always felt like I've had this kind of one up on when we have hard things come, like I already know how to tell the teacher, the professor that she doesn't need to talk louder. Maybe she just needs to talk slower, right? That's an example of me feeling like I had to advocate for him. So these different things have arose in our friendship and in our marriage where we had to take a step back and say, when we're going through this, how do we love each other? How do we make each other feel loved no matter what? I don't know. Even more recently, he just had a friend that passed away. And I didn't know what to do. I'll be transparent and say that I didn't know what to do because when it was family, I knew how to respond. But I didn't know this friend of his. So this was fresh in my marriage where I had to respond differently because this was someone that he knew from a different part of his life. And so when we come up to those places in our marriages, we have to take a stop and take a breather and say, I don't always know what I'm doing. And that's okay not to know what I'm doing. And a lot of times we assume that we have to know. So when you're preparing for the future, be able to give yourself the grace to know that I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'm going to love my spouse through whatever the future holds.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the key point to everything is having a conversation after it. So, with my friend that passed, because we had a conversation, now we know how to prepare for future grieving or loss that may arise. So, new thing, have conversation about it because something else is going to come up, and that's how you prepare. Because now you say, okay, I know how my wife will react to this, so now she needs my presence just to be there. She doesn't necessarily want me to talk, but things like that, those conversations allows you to have a game plan.
Well, I'm happy I changed that question on you guys because we got some great stuff here. And so I'm hearing you say so many important things. First, I'm hearing you say that one of the main ways to sort of combat tough times is to build the foundation in those good moments, right? So that you sort of have this strong foundation that you're able to navigate those tough times, whether they're related specifically to your marriage or to you as individuals or external factors that could influence your marriage as well. But I'm also hearing you both talk about this idea of using moments that happen as learning opportunities for the next time too, right? And so when you mentioned Tim's friend passing, Stormy, and just not knowing how to really navigate that because it was a different sort of phase of his life, right? And so now next time you sort of know what his needs might be in that moment. And I think it's really important to use those struggles as learning opportunities, and to not be afraid to, like you said, give yourself grace to ask your partner, what do you need from me? To say, I don't know how to support you, but I'm here, right? And just kind of knowing that we don't know it all about our partner, no matter how long we've been together. You guys have been together for a lifetime, and I'm certain that there's things you're learning about each other and how you navigate conflict every day. And so I think that's what I'm hearing from you is just keep talking, keep learning, keep asking, right? Don't make assumptions.
Yes, that is it. And Tim, we always say be present. If you can be present, that's a world of difference. And, a lot of times we forsake those opportunities because we are on all the way back to the beginning, social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what does it look like for us to be a presence for our partners in their time of need?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, with that, that transitions really well into sort of a takeaway point. I just wanted to kind of end today's program with maybe just one or two points that you'd really like our viewers to kind of walk away with today. And so we'll start with Stormy.
So we always empower couples, one, to pursue your partner. The pursuit is really where the magic happens. And so, continue to pursue in whatever capacity that looks like. Continue to find new ways to be intentional in your marriage, to be ladies or my type A people, get out of your box, be spontaneous. I'm talking to myself, friends. But really, but find those ways. And then the last thing I say is we are always empowering people to be their own relationship goals. You don't have to look for the next poster couple that you need to model your relationship after. You have the tools, you can get the tools if you don't have them. HRI has a lot of tools that you can use to be your own relationship goals, and you find those like-minded people that can really pour into your marriage and really empower you to be better spouses every day.
Right. Two things. First thing, to go back to constant conversation counsel confusion.
Yes.
Continue to have conversation, and it will help counsel all of those confusion that trying to break your marriage. Second thing is maximize your marriage. Use every moment, maximize it. And what maximize means is remove those things that are sucking your relationship dry. So maximize it by saying, you know what? When I wake up in the morning, I'm going to say I love you. I'm going to tell you how much you're beautiful without the makeup and the bonnet on your head. I'm going to do all of that. And then the moment you go to sleep, text your spouse throughout the day. Yeah, have sex.
Yeah.
Marriage. Have constant sex. Don't allow it seems like a conversation, but that is a great way to be intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And also having conversation before and after as well. But yeah.
Love those takeaway points. I'm hearing you both say to never stop flirting, never stop talking, never stop being intentional. And I think those are great messages for not just younger couples embarking on the journey of marriage, but couples who have been married for decades, right? These are important messages no matter where you are in your marriage journey. And so I just really wanted to once again extend our gratitude from the Healthy Relationships Initiative for both Stormy and Tim Covington and your time today and just sharing so much of your story, not only from your professional sort of experiences and spiritual guidance that you provide for others, but also your personal stories. It really helps to just give some perspectives. And we talked a lot about mentorship and looking to other couples and trying to see the things in those couples that you want for yourself. And I think you both really embody that, not only for the Guilford County community, we're lucky to have you both here, but beyond. And we're really grateful that you took the time today to help us deliver this resource and to also be a part of our bigger Healthy Relationships Week. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.